Hello, my name is Cameron from 5 Elements Studio, and today I'm going to be demonstrating how to effectively use our digital backdrops in Photoshop. So I'm going to be covering the whole process. So that begins with importing the backdrop into Photoshop, how we can adjust the backdrop if we need to based on our subject. I'm then going to show you how to add the subject into your scene, and then I will cover how to refine the edges of your subject so the edges are not rough or look incorrect when sitting in the backdrop. I'm then going to cover enhancing the subject so that they sit seamlessly into the scene. So we're going to cover techniques like color adjustment and lighting adjustment so that it sits seamlessly in the scene. I'm then going to also cover using some of our overlays, and then we will look at some additional backdrops from our packs, and then we will move into final touches on your image and just some ideas and techniques around post-production, and I will then also go back to adjusting our scene if we need to, or just some ideas around that, so you can do it yourself. And so and then I'll also show you how to export the image as well in the highest quality. So let's just get straight into it. Okay, so first of all, I'm actually just going to show you how to import the backdrop into Photoshop. So if you don't have a canvas size in mind, or a preloaded canvas in Photoshop, all of our backdrops are optimized for high quality print. So the longest edge is 8,000 pixels, and the image itself is print quality 300 dpi. So it's recommended that you just open our backdrop files directly and just start working within them for maximum image quality. So I'm just going to show you how to bring that into Photoshop, and I will also show you the method will also work if you import it directly into a canvas. So if I just close out of this, and if I just navigate to where I have my files, and so we're going to be working with this newborn 10 file here. So whichever backdrop you use, so it will be, you just select your backdrop. So this backdrop here, newborn 10, all we're going to do is just going to click, and we're just going to drag it straight into Photoshop here, and it will open up the image in Photoshop. The other method is we can go File, Open, and if I just navigate to exactly where that file is, we can just click on our file and click Open, and it will do the same thing. So you can either drag your file directly into Photoshop's default homepage and it will open it up, or you can go File, Open, and import your file. The other method is if you already have a document. So it's, for example, say you know exactly what you want, like you're doing an A4 print. If you go into the Photoshop and go File, New, and you look at the Photoshop predefined templates, and you want to do an A4 print, just as an example, you can just open up your A4 print by clicking Create, and you'll see we just have a white background here. So same thing as before, we just navigate to our file, and you can just click and drag your image into your canvas like that. I'll cover adjustments soon, but that's just the two methods of bringing your image into Photoshop. So like I said, you can click and drag directly into a predefined Photoshop document, like template that we just created, or you can just open the image directly. So like I explained earlier, I recommend just bringing our image directly into Photoshop, so you will have the highest quality. Alright, let's move on to the next part. Okay, so once you've brought your backdrop into Photoshop, the first thing I recommend you do is save your document. So if we've just opened up our backdrop in Photoshop directly, what we want to do is we want to click on our background layer, and we just want to right click and we want to click duplicate layer, and we're just going to leave that as background copy and hit OK. So we're just making a copy of our background layer, just because this is a best practice method for working in Photoshop. And so what we're also going to do is we're going to right click this background copy and we're going to convert to smart object. So this will be helpful later if we need to do any resizing of the backdrop. So again, another good practice. So we've duplicated and converted to smart object, and then we're going to go up to file, save as, and then we're going to look and we're just going to we're going to save our file exactly where we want it on our computer. So I'm just going to save this in here, and I'm going to leave it named newborn 10, and it's make sure the document type is Photoshop, of course, and hit save. All right, let's move on. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to talk about is adjusting the backdrop. So we've brought the backdrop into Photoshop and we've made a copy of our layer here. And so there's a few ways to adjust your backdrop. So you can actually just, with your layer highlighted, we can just click and we can just drag. You can see we can just drag the backdrop around our canvas. We can also, if we click on our background copy and go up to edit, transform, scale, and if we just grab one of these edges here, we can actually just start to scale our image on our canvas like that. So while we are in transform mode, we can click and actually just move the image around the canvas like this. And one other thing I'm going to mention as well is if you don't have it already turned on, you can turn on snapping by going up to view and making sure snap is ticked. And what that means is your image is going to snap to the bounds of your document here. So it just helps with alignment if you're needing to do resizing. So for this demonstration today, the image here is quite nice. It's sitting kind of in the thirds here. But since I know that we're doing a newborn portrait, I'm actually going to center it into the middle of the canvas. So by doing that, I just grab this right-hand side, and we're just going to scale that up just to bring it into the center here, and then I'll just move it down just to center this little swing here with the leaves all over it. So that looks quite good. I can actually just quickly check the alignment. This is another technique. If we go up to view, guides, new guide layout, and if we just change the columns to 3 and rows to 3, and I'm going to turn off margin and just hit OK. So you can see with the guides here, it's enabled us to see just how aligned it is, and I do like how that's sitting there. So I'm just going to go back up to view, guides, and then I'm going to clear the guides to turn those off again. So yeah, that's basically how to align and adjust our backdrop. And now let's move on to adding our subject. Okay, so now we're going to move on to adding our subject into our scene. So just as a reminder, if you haven't already, just make a save on your document. So by pressing Control S, just to save, or going up to File, Save, just to make sure you're constantly saving your document in case of any errors or crashes or anything, just to avoid losing anything. So always remember to regularly save your document. Okay, so we have our background set up. Now we're going to bring in our subject. So I'm just going to navigate to the folder where I have my subject, and I'm just going to click and drag and just bring that subject in here into our Photoshop document. So with that selected, we are in transform mode now. We can see with these arrows here. So if we just double click, we'll just set the layer in that position. And of course we can move around, but now our subject is in the scene. So now we actually have to cut out the subject, and so there's a number of ways to do cutouts on subjects. So this particular image here, this one I find to be slightly challenging in a sense, because we have this the edges of this woolly mat here with the baby, and also the aperture is quite a low aperture, meaning we're getting some very soft edges around the further parts of the baby here. So we've got nice and sharp edges here, but then it starts to get a bit soft around here. So the edge softness is a little bit inconsistent. And so the best method for cutting out is to use the pen tool with this particular subject. But I'll quickly show you one method, and then we'll jump into the pen tool. So if you've got a subject on a clean backdrop, like a perfectly clean backdrop, this isn't perfect, like I said. It's pretty good, but it's not perfect. So with your layer selected, just go up to select and then go to select subject. And what that's going to do is Photoshop is going to automatically work out where the subject is and make a selection. So you can see it's already done a pretty good job of cutting around this baby here. And so to create a mask of that, so with our layer selected and the selection active with the marching ants, we just hit the layer mask icon and it will have a cutout of the newborn. So in this particular instance, we actually would have to go in and refine the edges here because these edges are quite rough. And so that's why I wanted to show you that method, because that's one way of cutting out your subject. But today, I'm just going to delete this layer mask. Today, I'm going to show you using the pen tool, because it will enable us to get a clean cut without rough edges. And then we can just refine the edges one more time after we get the clean cut with the pen tool. So not every time will you need to use the pen tool, but for this instance we will. So let's just dive into using the pen tool for this one. So we select our pen tool by pressing the letter P, or just clicking on your pen tool in the tools panel here. So just make sure pen tool is selected. So with the pen tool and our layer selected, I'm just going to zoom in by pressing Z just to zoom in, and we're just going to do a clean cut here of the baby. So before diving into this, I had tested just doing Adobe's subject cutout, but then I realized that because the edges here have a lot of detail interacting with it, like this mat here, it just meant we would have had to take extra steps. So today we're just going to use the pen tool to get a nice clean cut around the subject. So we're just using our best judgment here to fix up these edges, because we're going to want to make sure we're not cutting off too many toes or parts of the baby. So you can see here it's quite soft on the edges, so we need to account for that when we're compositing it into our scene so that it looks correct. So you can see here with this particular example, which is a good example, because it's getting a little difficult to see where the edge of the baby is and the mat, because the colors are the same. So we just need to use our best judgment in these scenarios to get the best quality cutout. And it's the same with Adobe. When it automatically selects a subject, it's just guessing where the edges are. and it's not as good as a human. So I'm not going too slowly. We're just getting a cutout here of around the baby. Now, when we get to the hair, we actually can use Adobe's tool to refine the hair. This is good because the hair is on a nice white background here, so we don't need to get a super clean cut of the hair. We can just cut around like this, around the edge, and so this is what we'll need to refine. We can come back down around the band here, and when we get nice and close again, so once we have that full selection with the pen tool, I've joined all the dots up. We right click and click make selection. And make sure our feather radius is set to about 0.5. I have anti-aliasing on and hit OK. So we'll get the marching ants like we saw before, and we're just going to click the layer mask icon. So now you can see we've got a better cutout than what Adobe did around the edge here of the baby. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to refine the hair here. And then we're going to just refine the edges of the mask around the baby. So to refine the hair, like I explained before, we did a wide kind of cut on the hair. So we're going to double click on our layer mask, and we'll move into the edge refinement tool. So you'll see we have this panel over here. So we need to make sure we select our refine edge brush, and it's set to this expanded detection area here. I believe all these other settings should be default, and we'll just leave them on default. So we're just going to go with this little plus icon here, and just make sure we're kind of moving around that halo area above the baby's hair. So, and you can see that Photoshop is doing its best to remove that white background from the hair. So we're doing this with a mouse, and we just need to do this nice and neatly around the edges. So you'll see when it starts to get darker behind the subject, we start to get some more fringing problems, but we will fix this. So the hair refinement has done a pretty good job here. So once I'm happy with the way it's cut that background out, just hit OK and we'll add that to the selection. Now the next thing, because we're going to finally refine the edges here, we want to make sure we can see the edges of the subject clearly. So to do that, just on this background layer here, we select the layer underneath the subject layer, and we're going to create a adjustment layer by clicking on the adjustment layer icon and clicking solid color. And we're going to make sure that our H is selected for hue, and we're just going to go to the far left, and we're going to go to like this kind of just below mid-range kind of gray, and we're going to hit OK. And so what that does is we create a fill layer below the subject, which enables us to get a clear look of around the subject here. Okay, so we can see that we have some fringing around the hair here, and some issues around here. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to go back and we're going to select our mask here on our subject. Now I'm going to get the brush tool because we need to use the brush to refine the hair here. So we press the letter B on your keyboard, or you can go over to your brush panel and make sure you just select brush. So with our brush selected, we're just going to right click on the canvas to bring up our brushes panel. And I'm actually going to just select the hard round brush and make sure the hardness is set to around 80%. I also have my opacity and flow set to 100 and smoothing set to 20. So now what we're going to do is where we have this fringing around the edge of the baby's head, we're just going to make sure we have the black selected as our foreground color. So here it is, 100% black. And black means we are painting away our mask. So we're just going to paint as neatly as we can. We're just going to paint away that that halo-ish kind of fringing around the hair. And we don't have to worry too much about taking off any stray flyaways. Don't worry too much about that. We just want it to be neat. So we're just painting away those hairs and just down here. So I'm going to switch to my foreground color as white. You can actually press this little arrow here. So I'm going to change to white. I'm just going to bring that out there just so I can just get a look at where that band is. And I'm just going to re-refine that band. So because we had all that fringing here, so that was with the white. I just painted the white there. If we just go back to the black, I'm just going to paint away all along the edge here. Just like that, just to neaten up that band on the baby's head and have a decent enough edge refinement there with the hair. So that all looks quite neat. Now if I just quickly check if I paint that back in. So yeah, we've got a really neat cutout here. And if I just go back to my black color here and just paint away some of that hair. I'm just going to paint some of that band back in. I'm just going to paint away some of that hair. So the rest of the edges actually look quite good. We're going to fix up this here. And yeah, we're just going to refine slightly here just to get close to like the baby's actual face. Make sure there's not too much extra edge. Just like that. And I'm pretty happy with that cutout so far. So once we've got a nice initial cutout like we just do now, we just want to fix a couple of things like these edges and the hair if required. So you could probably get away with not worrying too much about the hair, but what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how to just darken up some of that hair so it will look better when it's sitting on the background. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new layer by clicking this plus icon. And then with that layer here, we're just going to hold down Alt and see we start to see this little clip arrow here. And we're just going to clip it to this layer here. So by holding Alt, we can see we've got that option to clip. So with that layer then clipped on, any painting that we do is going to just clip on to that layer. Very handy. So what we're going to do is we're just going to fix up some of this hair. So we're going to go to our brush tool again, make sure we've got brush selected. We're going to right click and we're just going to change to just a soft round brush. And with the soft round brush, we're just going to select a color of the baby's hair in the dark area, like the dark here, brown. And with the soft brush, we're just going to just gently just paint along these edges here. So if you're using, I'm using a tablet here. If you're using a mouse, you can change your opacity and flow lower, and it will lower the rate at which it's painting with flow. And similarly with opacity, same thing. If you change the opacity, you'll change the rate at which you paint, like if you're clicking with your mouse. So I'm just going to change mine back. So yeah, we just select like one of the dark areas of the baby's hair. And by doing that, I'm holding Alt, and you can get the eyedropper tool and make a selection. Hold Alt, selection, or you click your eyedropper tool and make a selection. Same thing. So if you've got your brush tool, you can do that by holding Alt. So we're just going to paint in around the edge of the subject's hair, just to fix up that kind of halo look. So that looks okay now. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get my eraser. So by pressing E, we get our erase tool. And with our erase tool, we're just going to slightly just erase some of the edge off here. Don't go too far in, but we just want it to look seamless and correct. So we're just going to use the erase tool to just gently erase some of that edge, so it's not, we haven't painted too much color onto the top of the baby's head. We're mainly just focused on refining that edge. So you can even gently just start to paint away a little bit on that edge. And I'll probably stop around there because I don't want to interfere too much further. But if we go back to our layer here and turn that off, you look at the before and look at the after. It's a much better result on the baby's hair than before. So one other thing I was attempting is you can change the blend mode to multiply, which will darken the edge even further. So for this demonstration, I'm actually going to do that. So we've painted on our layer, and I'm going to change the blend mode to multiply. And that means the edge of the hair is much darker, and I feel like it will look a bit better. I'll just have a look here. Yeah. I'm going to leave it at multiply just for the demonstration because it looks very neat and tidy. It actually looks very good. So you can change your blend mode to multiply. You can try different blend modes. You might have a different subject. Multiply might be too dark. It might not look correct. You can leave it at normal. But for this demonstration, I'm going to leave it at multiply and just hit enter. Okay, so that's the hair done. Okay, so once we've refined the hair, we just need to go ahead and refine the edges where we have these elements from the original backdrop behind the baby here. We just need to refine these little pieces of fluff here and fix up the edges here. And then once we've done that, we will just fix up these harsh edges over here. And then we'll pretty much be done with the subject refinement, and we can move on to placing the subject in the scene. So there's a couple of ways of doing this, but the easiest way is to just paint them out so we don't lose some of the coloring on the edges here. So what we do is we create a new layer above the hair layer, and I'm just going to again hold Alt and clip it here, and I'm just going to rename that edge because this will be our edge refinement layer. So I'm going to press B to make sure we have our brush tool. I'm just going to right click and I'm just going to select a soft brush. Now this method here is a method where we're just color selecting. So by holding Alt, we are just color selecting the edge and we're just painting over these white fluffy parts. So we're just kind of color select and just paint. Just to paint away those fringe, like that fringing there, with the white sheet behind the baby. So we're just using the brush tool just to paint them away. We could use different tools, but we're not going to because they just weren't working super well for this particular image. So yeah, and there's not much of it, so it won't take too long. So color select, hold Alt, color pick, and then just paint. Color pick and just paint. We're just painting away just any fringing on the edges there. And already, if you see, oops. So if we just look at before and after, you can see it's all clean now. So again here, select here, just going to paint these away. Select here, just paint these away. Just making sure it's nice and soft, just painting away that white. So color pick, just paint away that white edge. Color pick, just paint away that white edge. Same here and here. Just painting away that whiteness. just like that. So you see me just color picking and just painting. You won't need to do this with all your subjects. This one, yeah, I mean, it just had a bit of information infringing on the baby here. So we just paint that away. Paint. Just being as neat as possible, just painting that whiteness away. And along here, this is a tricky part. We'll just paint this here. And where that shadow is, we'll just put that shadow back in here. Just make sure it's a nice, soft kind of just doing our best to kind of just paint in that information that's missing. It's always tricky when you can't fully see it. But just like that, that's fine. Just to kind of get rid of it. Just like that. Alright, so if we just quickly check the before and after, you can see we've gotten rid of that fluff on the edge there, just along that particular edge. So we're going to leave the rest of the edges how they are, and now we are going to move on to placing the subject on the backdrop and further refining the edges. So let's do that now. Okay, so before we move any further, we're just going to make a save of our file by pressing Ctrl S or going up to File, Save. Just best practice to always save our document when working in Photoshop. Okay, so now that we have our subject cut out and we have the hair and edges refined, I'm just going to go to our hair layer here and right click and convert that to a smart object, and I'm going to do the same with the edge refinement layer. Right click, convert to smart object. And so once I've done that, I'm just going to hold shift and select all these three layers, which is the subject layer and the two edge refinement layers, and I'm just going to click on this little folder icon. So it's going to turn that into a group, and we're just going to rename that by double clicking on it to subject. So now we have the subject in its own group, and so we can just click on this color fill layer here and just press delete to remove it. So now we're just going to place the subject in the scene using transform, and then we'll move on to the adjustment layers and getting the color and lighting correct on the subject. So I'm just going to go up to edit, free transform with the folder selected, and this will enable us to transform this group and position the subject into a desirable position here on the canvas. So I'm just going to move the baby just to a place where I feel like it's sitting well. So we don't want it too large. I'm just going to make sure it's as though the baby is really sitting there. It seems to sit pretty nicely there. If you can actually rotate as well by moving up to the corner here, you'll see it turn to a rotate. You can actually rotate your subject, but I'm pretty happy with how the baby is positioned. I might add a slight rotation. and I'm just going to double click and confirm the transform just there. So once that's done, I'm just going to save that again, Control S, we'll go up to File Save, and now we can move on to adding our adjustment layers. Okay, so now we are at the more technical part of the artwork here, and we are going to start to blend this subject into this backdrop here. So this process, there's no definitive way to do it precisely, because it's a highly subjective and creative process, and there's so many different ways you can approach it. But today I'm just going to use the minimum necessary requirements to get this subject here blended into the backdrop, and I'm just going to talk through some of the principles and ideas around placing a subject into a background, and we're going to blend the lighting and the colors, and then refine the edges. So the process will be, we're going to adjust the lighting on the subject, we are then going to adjust the colors, we're then going to add some shadow, and then we are going to refine the edges. So that's basically the process. And once we've done that, we should have a pretty good result, and hopefully you will have learned some techniques and some of the ideas around this process. So to get started, we have our folder here, our group, sorry, with our subject. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a adjustment layer, which is a hue saturation adjustment layer. And I'm just going to add this to the top here of the layers that are clipped on here to the subject layer. I'm just going to hold Alt and just make sure I'm clipping that adjustment layer to the subject. And I'm also going to add, if I click on the adjustment layer icon, I'm just also going to add a curves adjustment layer on top of the hue saturation. So you'll see why shortly. I'm adding these two to begin with. So we go hue saturation and then a curves adjustment. So the curves adjustment is to make changes to the values, which is the lighting on the subject, as well as each of the color channels, red, green, and blue. We can also adjust the color. We're just going to stay with RGB here. So we are just adjusting the brightness and darkness on the subject. So I won't talk too deeply about curves. There's different adjustment layers you can use, but today I'm just going to demonstrate curves because it's a very flexible adjustment layer to adjusting lighting on a subject. So the first thing I'm concentrating on at this point, because we can continuously improve and make changes throughout the process depending on what we need to do. And what I mean by that is we can start with one adjustment layer and get like a base adjustment on the subject, and then we can add more adjustment layers to refine the lighting if we need to. So we're not going to stress too much about getting it perfect because we can refine it afterwards. And yeah, we may reach a decent enough result in a short time. So we will see how we go. So I have my curves adjustment layer here, and so with the curves adjustment here, you've got this line which runs from the bottom left to the top right, and it's basically a line that represents the values in the entire image. So you'll see this like graph here. This is called, I think it's a histogram. Hopefully I have that correct. And if I move this, you'll see if I move the bottom left, I'm making adjustments to, like, I'm brightening the shadows, and if I move to the right, I'm actually darkening the shadows. So we're moving from the shadows to the mid-tones to the highlights in the image. So if I grab the top right here and move to the left, you'll see I'm actually adjusting the overall brightness of the highlights. And if I do the same by bringing the top highlights, the top of the curves line here down, we're actually making the highlights darker. So that's kind of the spectrum here. So the first thing I want to do is I want to just get a nice base level of light on the subject that matches the background well enough. So I'm going to start by putting a point here on the line by just left clicking, and this will enable us to get some control on the shadows. So if I just grab this little line here and we just start to move to the right here, you'll see we're starting to make some darker contrasts occur in the shadows on the baby here. So I'm just going to move over to the right to a point where I feel like we are in the correct range based on the lighting in the background. So just to make things a little bit clearer, when compositing or putting a subject into a scene, we just want to bear in mind and reference the darkest areas in the background and the brightest areas in the background. Our job is to basically make sure the darkest areas on the subject that we're putting in match relatively well enough the darkest areas on the background. And same for the highlights. We want to make sure that the highlights on the subject match the highlights in the background. So we don't want to have a subject that's far too dark for the background and far too bright for the background. That just wouldn't make sense. That's the best way we can determine the correct lighting. So I'm just going to move the shadow, this little point here I've put on the shadows, just going to move this over to the right. And I'm just going to move in slightly here so you can kind of see. I'm looking at one of the dark areas on the baby here, and we can see the hair here is quite dark in comparison to the kind of this faded background look we have here in the shadows. So we're not going to worry too much right now, but we're just going to keep that in mind for adjusting in a moment. So if I move the baby this way with the darkness, we can see that's probably too much. That's probably not enough. We're kind of going to sit maybe, just moving left and right here, we're just probably going to sit maybe just around here for now. So I'm just going to make some further refinements here. So maybe around there. So the next thing is I'm just going to grab the highlights and just move them down slightly, because we're going to add some more lighting in a moment. So if I just bring the highlights down maybe to around there for now, and I'm also going to add another point here so we can make some additional just refinements to the lighting on the subject here. So I'm just going to be just moving these 2 points around just to get a result that I'm happy with. Right, so I'm going to leave the points like that for the moment. I'll just see if I can just add a little bit more highlight back into the subject by moving this, but not too high. We don't want it too contrasted. Just to around there. So I'm just going to move down to the hue saturation adjustment layer. And because the reason I added this in first was because if we start making changes to the value in the image, we start to see some saturation. We need to adjust the saturation as well. So making sure that, because generally when subjects or when images are in shadow, they're less saturated. So we just need to make sure we're kind of matching that adjustment on the shadows just on the baby here with the baby's skin color. We don't want it like too saturated. We just need to bring it down a little because we got the baby in some shadow, just like that. So the next thing I'm going to do is, once we have our base level curves adjustment, which we can refine afterwards, we're going to add we're going to adjust the colors. So before I do that, I'm just actually going to make some further refinements here. So I'm actually going to move the utmost shadow point here just up a little, because I can see we've kind of got this faded kind of look here, and I'm kind of just making sure that dark area on the baby's hair is a similar level of fade. So I'm going to just bring those shadows a little bit brighter. Oops. And just making sure, yeah, we're getting a more correct looking lighting. So if I just turn this curves off, yeah, you see before and after. And yeah, so we've basically just darkened the highlights and shadows here, and we've added a little bit more brightness in the shadows just to match the contrast of the shadows here on the swing. Okay, next thing we're going to do is adjust the colors. So to do that, I'm going to add a color balance adjustment layer and just clip it above the curves. And I'm just going to adjust the saturation down just a little bit more and then move back to color balance. Okay, so with color balance, this is basically kind of what I mentioned before. We can work with the shadows, midtones, and highlight colors in the image. So this is quite a handy adjustment layer, because we can we've got some flexibility in adjusting the colors on the subject. So we may not need to delve into the shadows, but we are just focusing on the midtones and highlights for now, and just matching those colors with the background. So like I mentioned earlier, there's a number of ways to do this, but in my experience, this is probably the most straightforward method, and it will enable you to also learn about matching subjects into a scene. So I'm just going to move the first slider here and just move it in a direction that is moving the colors in a, you can tell that that's too red and that's too much cyan. So we're kind of just finding a middle ground, probably about there, and then we move on to the next slider. So we can see the background here is actually kind of greenish. So we're just going to add some more green into the subject just to match that overall tone. Like not too much, just a little bit, just there. And then lastly, this final slider here, you can tell that's too much blue, too much, probably not too much yellow there, too much yellow. We're going to find a happy kind of area here. Just like that, I think. So if I turn that on and off already, you can see the difference in the color. And yeah, we can always refine it afterwards if we need to. So we've adjusted the midtones, and we're just going to do the same for the highlights. So this is just going to affect the brightest areas on the subject. So if we just click on highlights, and I'll just do the same. I'm just going to kind of move it in a direction that I feel like is relatively correct. We don't need a lot here. Probably about there. Probably about there. And I can see that the highlights here are quite, if I get my eyedropper, if we use the eyedropper tool, we can actually check the color here. So if we go to a bright area, and if we check what color we've got, yeah, we can actually see we're in the green zone here with these highlights. So good practice to bear in mind when we're adjusting highlights. We can add a little bit of green in there, just like that. And this final highlights here. Just like that. I think that's fine. So that's pretty good for now. We could attempt to adjust the shadows, but I tend to find that the shadow adjustments on the color balance can be quite harsh. But perhaps we will do it today just to demonstrate. So with the shadows, Just going to click on shadows, and I'm just going to look at the shadows here on the baby, and look here and just make sure, like, we just choose an area where we can see dark, and we're just going to match. Like if I color pick over here, like here, yeah, we can see we're in the green kind of yellow zone here. So bear that in mind when you're making the adjustments. I'll add a little bit of yellow, tiny bit of yellow, tiny bit of green. Yeah, and I'll leave it at that. It's like very minimal. So I've added one green and took away one blue with that adjustment. So I'm pretty happy with that base level of lighting on the baby right now, and we will make further adjustments in the next couple of steps. So I'm just going to make a save on that. Control S, or go up to File, Save. And now we will move on to making some more lighting adjustments. Okay, so now we're at the stage where we're going to do some further refinements here on the baby. And now I'm just zooming in just quickly here on the baby's head. I'm just going to make some slight further adjustments to the shadows here on the baby. And I'm just going to bring those greens back a little in the shadows. And the yellows. So I'm actually going to add a little bit of red into the shadows, just like that. Yeah, so if I just turn that off and on, I'm probably more happy with that result at the moment than what it was before. I just felt like it was slightly too green in the shadows. So yeah, we will probably make some refinements during this process, and yeah, that's what we do. We kind of re-review, and we can go back and make changes if we feel necessary. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I want to actually add some shadow underneath the baby here, as though they're actually, you know, lying on the swing here. So to do that, we are just actually going to paint in the shadows just on a normal layer. So we're just going to close this group here, just this little arrow. We're going to move below the group here by clicking on this background layer, and I'm just going to create a new layer by clicking on this new layer icon, and that's going to create a layer underneath the subject layer. So the shadows that we want to paint under the baby need to match the background as much as possible. And so what I'm going to do is we're going to use our eyedropper tool by pressing the I key, or just selecting your eyedropper tool. And we're just going to, on the background, just select an area of shadow that we are going to paint underneath the baby as a base. So I'm kind of looking in this area here. We'll probably go for, if I just check this one, like just color sample one of these shadowy areas here, like this one. And yeah, so we'll start painting with that, and if I need to adjust it, I will. The big thing is making sure the shadows not only match the background but also the baby. So we're just going to color sample, yeah, a shadow from here, just there. So once we've done that, we'll grab our brush tool by pressing B or selecting the brush tool, and just make sure we've got a soft brush selected. If you're using a mouse, you can change your opacity or flow. I think you'll need to change your opacity, and it just means you will be painting gently underneath the baby here. So I'm just going to, along the edge here, just start to paint in, like with the brush, just some shadows here along the, just gently kind of just brushing along the edge here of the baby, just kind of covering those bright areas where the baby's meeting the ground here. So we're just kind of doing this gently. We're just kind of painting in just along here. The other thing with painting in shadows underneath, it helps a lot with making adjustments to the subject as well. Because if things don't look right without, like if the subject's sitting in a scene without a shadow, it makes it a little bit harder to determine what needs to be added or not. So we need to just get all the elements kind of working together to look correct, as though the subject is actually sitting in the scene. So that color selection we made of the shadows here, and because of the adjustments we made before on the subject, I can see that there's not a harsh difference between between the shadows here on the subject and the shadows underneath, which is good. So I'm not too unhappy with that. That looks quite good. So yeah, we're just bearing in mind also the light is coming from here, so we need to make sure that we are thinking about the light hitting behind the baby here and on top of the baby, and how the shadows may be cast here, and what kind of lighting is actually going to be passing past the baby's head here. You know, we don't want to go too high here with the shadows. I mean, you probably can, depending on what you want to achieve. But just in this example, I'm just going to go with my best judgment here and just make sure, kind of painting over that. Whoops. So that's already looking better. We've got a nice, if I just turn that layer on and off, you can see the difference visually with the shadow there under the baby. Yeah, we are, I think that's pretty good for now. I just, with the brush, I'm kind of just slightly adding more refinements here. Just making sure that where the utmost edge is here on the baby, we've got like the most amount of darkness, I suppose. And then it kind of just, we're just gently just tapering off that shadow under here, just to have it looking a little bit more seamless, just like that. So right now, if you're looking closely, depending on what you're working with as well, the edges will be harsh. We will refine the edges after we finish the lighting. We will soften the edges, match the edges as best we can, and yeah, it will be looking much better. So with that done, I'm just going to double click on this layer here on the name and just name that shadow, and that will be our base shadow layer. So for this example today, I don't think I want to take the shadows too much further. That might change depending on how I feel when we get to the end of the coloring. But right now, that level of shadow I'm quite happy with. I don't know if we need to go further with the shadows underneath the subject. That I'm quite happy with. So I'm just going to make a save of my document. So the next thing we want to do is we want to add some more lighting behind the baby here, like as though the light is actually hitting the subject from up here. So yeah, our job, like I mentioned earlier, is to make sure that the lighting on the subject is matching the lighting on the background. So to do that, we're going to go back to our subject group here, and on top I'm going to add another curves adjustment layer, and I'm going to hold Alt and I'm going to clip that to the top of the subject layer. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab the top slider here, and I'm just going to move the highlights slightly to the left, not too far, because you can see we're starting to get some information loss on the highlights. We're just kind of moving just a little bit higher to get a nice level of bright. It's not too harsh. And then I'm going to put another point here and just move the highlights just up a little more here. So I'm paying attention to the edge of the baby here. and making sure that if the brightness, if it was really hitting the baby, how it would look. So we want to make it pretty bright, not overpowering, but pretty bright, because we want the edges here to match the lighting back here, basically. So I think right there is good for now. I'm going to add another point here on the shadows just to adjust the contrast on the shadows here just slightly. And we can change it if we need to. So just like that. So I'm going to rename this curves layer to highlights. And if you want to, I'm going to rename this base curves to base lighting. So if I just turn these layers off, you'll see we've just got this saturation adjustment that we made, the base lighting that we did, the color balance, which is the color, the recolor of the subject, and then the highlights layer. So this is obviously too bright, so we're actually going to paint in on the mask and paint in the areas of brightness that we want to have on the subject. So to do that, I'm just going to click on the layer mask of the highlights, and I'm going to invert that by pressing Control I, or you can go up to, if I can find it, I'm not sure where to find it up there, but if I just right click here. So I'm not sure exactly where the invert is, but I know the shortcut is on PC is Control I to invert the mask, or on Mac I believe it's Command I. Same shortcut. So the reason we are inverting the mask here is so that we can turn off the adjustments. See how it changes to black? So it's basically painted it all away. So the whites we paint on, the blacks means it's painted away, so that we can actually take our brush by pressing B with our soft brush, changing our foreground color to white, and see how we can just start to paint that light in on the subject. So that's exactly what we're going to do now. So with that mask inverted and our brush selected and our color set to white, paying attention to the lighting here, we're just going to gently, again, similar to what we did with the shadows, just start to paint in lighting here on the baby. So we're just thinking about where that lighting is hitting. Lighting will be hitting up here, like this. Just gently painting in lighting here on the subject. Just gently brushing in around these edges here where we might see some lighting. Now if I need to brush away, like if I've painted in too much lighting here, I just press X on my keyboard, or you press this arrow here, and you can swap between black and white if you're on your layer mask here. Just make sure you are working with the furthermost black in your color here. And we can just paint some, we can unpaint what we've done. So if it's too bright, we can paint some away. I'm kind of want to just make a slight adjustment to my curves here. So I'm just going to take the highlights down just slightly. Yeah, just slightly. It's not too bad. I just felt like it was a little bit bright, but it's actually not too bad. Yeah, just like that. So just clicking back on our layer mask, I'm just going to add some further lighting here. So what we're doing, yeah, we're just painting in the highlights. Then we're going to actually paint in some shadows just to get the best kind of match for the lighting. So that's basically what we're doing, is we're just manipulating the highlights and shadows on the subject just to match the lighting in the scene. So one thing I'm doing here is if I switch my color to white, painting on the highlights just like that. So that's pretty good. So if I paint quite harshly here, just going to get my brush and invert. I'm just going to gently brush away some of that brightness there. And so where there is the lighting behind here, there's obviously going to be some shadows occurring on the baby here because the light is quite harsh. So I'm just going to paint underneath here where, like I'm using black, just paint away some of that lighting underneath where I feel like the light would be shaded by the baby's clothes, just here. Just to add in some extra dimension. So you'll see me switching between painting it on and off with the white and black here. So I'm basically just painting in the lighting. Whoops. Just going to add some refinement to my curves just to see if we can get a different kind of look here. I kind of feel like it maybe is too contrasty. I was kind of looking for like a glow, like a softer lighting here. Something's, yeah, more like this. I feel like that's a little bit better. Probably a little bit bright, but that's okay. So if we adjust the brightness in the shadows, just gives it a bit more softness. Yeah, that's not too bad. Just going to go back to my layer here and just paint away some of that. I feel like that lighting's a little bit harsh, and we can refine it afterwards. Just making my brush bigger here and just get a general kind of lighting on the subject here. Just painting some of that away here, just to add some more dimension to the subject lighting. And I'll probably just leave it there for now. We can refine it afterwards. So yeah, there we can see before and after on the highlights. And the edges here, they're not too much brighter than the background here. So we've got a nice kind of soft lighting applied on the top of the subject there. So once we've done that, we're going to add another curves adjustment layer. I'm going to clip it above the highlights, and we're going to rename that by double-clicking on it, double-clicking on the words here to shadows. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add the shadows to the subject. So we can see we're going to need some slight shadows around the edge here where the baby's sitting on this ground, and just some shadows on different parts of the clothes just to add some more dimension, similar to the backdrop here. So we're just going to start by dragging the highlights down a little bit more, so we get a nice base level of shadow on the baby. So I'm gonna zoom in here so we can see the shadows. So I'm actually going to, I can see where the change is occurring here between the shadows here and the shadows here. You'll see that it will meet the color level, and then it will go beyond too dark, like it's too dark, too bright. We're just going to get it to a range that's like, looks like it's matched well enough, just like that. And we can refine this further if we need to. So this is going to be our base shadow. I'm just going to leave some dynamics in here and just move that slightly. And I'm going to actually move that up slightly just to there. By adding this point here, I'm just like added a little bit more contrast. Yeah, I'm just going to leave that there. So that's the shadows for now. So same thing we did with the highlights. We're just going to click on this layer mask here and press Control I, or if you're on a Mac, it's Command I believe. And we're going to get our brush again with the white layer, white color. And we're going to just start painting in just around the edge here, just to add, just gently, just add some reflective shadow from where the baby is actually lying here. So I'm just going to soften that shadow up just by painting a little bit more around the edge here, just to get a nice base softness. Now once we've painted in along the edge of the baby here, we can actually re-refine the curves. So yeah, by adding a little bit more contrast, I can already see that I prefer it to be a bit more contrasted, just because of the way the background here is quite contrasty with the shadows and the lighting. I'm just going to add, by moving this point here, some more contrast into the baby on the shadows. Something like there. And I'm just moving this slightly, just there. Yeah, so I'm pretty happy with that. So I'm going to go back to the layer mask. Let's get my brush again. I'm just going to start painting a little bit more shadows in. Now I'm actually going to invert the brush now by changing to black. I'm just going to slowly, gently paint away just a tiny bit of that shadow here. Some of it I feel like is a little bit harsh. The thing is because we're adding the lighting, we don't want it. We want the subject to look correct, but because this is a creative process, we don't want the subject to just be completely dark in the scene. We want to keep it as visible and dynamic as possible, while being as creative as possible. And we're just painting away just some of those, just gently, just painting away some of what the shadow that we painted in, just to make sure that the edges, like if I turn it on and off, the edges here have a nice shadow that matches where the edge is meeting the ground here. That's basically all we need to worry about, is that the shadows are like the reflective light from the ground looks correct. So I'm quite happy with the shadows that we've painted in just now. So what I'm going to do is, with the same shadow layer, I'm just going to start to add in a couple of areas of shadow where I think it would need it. So actually, because we're going to be making further adjustments, before I do that, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to duplicate this shadow layer. So we're just going to actually rename this to base shadows. And I'm going to duplicate it by right clicking and duplicating. Base shadows copy is fine. And same thing, make sure it's clipped onto the subject. So we're going to right click on the layer mask and click on delete layer mask. And then we're going to click on this layer mask icon to create a new layer mask. And then we're going to again invert it. So it's basically just made a copy of that shadows that we created, and we've made a new shadows. So this is what we're going to call this. I'm just going to call it shadows 2, because we're going to paint in some additional shadows on the subject, and if we need to unpaint them, like if we paint in some shadows along some of the edges of the clothing here, and we need to remove it, we don't want to affect the base shadows that we've created. So I've just created, a duplicate of that so we can make individual adjustments and we don't affect the base shadows. So that's the reason for that. So we can see here, like in the original image of this baby, we've got shadows occurring here because of the way the image was, the lighting in the image. So because obviously we are compositing and this is a different scene, we want to actually just add shadows that match our scene. So we need to see the shadows here. We need to probably add some shadows here because this being lit brighter here doesn't really make a lot of sense in this scene. So just adjustments like that we can see that we will just add. So I'll just gently paint in along the edge here just some extra shadows. And even if you feel like you need to add some extra shadows to the edges of the subject, you can do that too. So I'm going to swap between, by pressing X, I'm going to swap between these just to paint away some of what I've painted in, just to make sure that we're not going overboard and we're just keeping it quite soft, because this is a portrait after all and we want it to be soft and gentle lighting, just like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to, no I'm not, I'm just going to quickly adjust this. Yeah, I'm just going to leave it how it is. And so I'm going to click back on my layer mask here, and again just painting in some areas here where there's too much brightness on the edge of the baby, where there could be some additional shadows. Like up here, just on here. Additional shadows, particularly here and along here. Just very gently. Make sure again, if you're using a mouse, you have your opacity turned down so you are not painting too strongly with every click. So I'm just painting in shadows in areas that I feel like the subject. See, I've painted them in, and then I gently, very gently, just paint them away. And again, I feel like this part is just quite bright. Just painting in some shadows in these areas where I feel like, along these crease lines particularly, where there would be a little more shadow, just along here. In here a little bit, just in here. Some shadows in here. Shadows under here. So if we just see what we've done here, you can see we've added a little bit more dimension to the subject, making it feel a little bit more like it's actually in the scene here. So I feel like these shadows here are a little bit harsh, as much as they seem correct. I'm just gonna paint them away slightly. Yeah, more so like that. We're gonna try and avoid painting too many shadows on the baby's face, just because, you know, it's portrait. We want it to stay as though we can see the baby's face. Just gonna add some extra shadows in over here, just in areas where I feel like it's going to need, whoops, just a little bit extra in the shadow department. Just in here, just gently, just in here and here, just adding some more dimension and depth to the subject. Let's paint some of that away. Alright, I think that's quite good. I'm just going to save my document, Control S, we'll go up to File, Save. And so now we have a little bit more dimension in our shadows here, which I think looks quite good. We will just get the lighting correct, like I mentioned before, and then we'll move into refining the edges. So I'm actually going to just have a look at how it looks reversed. Image rotation, flip canvas horizontal. So what flipping horizontally does is it makes your brain perceive the image, you know, mirrored, and it may see lighting differently when you flip the image. A lot of illustrators will use this technique when they're drawing because it helps your brain to see lighting differently than you may not be able to have seen it correctly on the original orientation. So again, image rotation, flip horizontal, just so we can see how the lighting is looking. And like, I'm actually quite happy with this. Obviously this process, like I kind of touched on earlier, it's a highly creative process, and it's a process of refinement. So we could refine further and further, getting the adjustments on the baby more and more detailed. But today, this is just an example of the principles of compositing and putting a subject into a scene. So already I'm actually quite happy with the work that we've done here. So if I just turn all these layers off, we can see what we've actually done. So we added our base lighting initially, and the skin was far too saturated. So we've turned the saturation down with that hue saturation. We then did the manual color matching based on the colors in the backdrop. We then added in some highlights where the lighting is actually hitting the subject. We then added some base shadows in around where the baby is actually meeting the swing here. And then we added in some further shadow refinements on the subject. So quite happy with that. I will actually, we could do one more lighting refinement. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the adjustments layer icon and just add in another curves and clip it here. And I'm just going, this is basically just an experiment. I'm just going to see if we can reach a slightly more desirable result by just overall brightening the subject. So when I'm doing this, I'm using my navigator as well, just to reference how it looks as a thumbnail. It's different when your brain is looking at an image on a canvas that's quite large compared to when it's looking at it in a small thumbnail view. It just helps you perceive the lighting a bit better. So I think what we've done is good. It may actually be just slightly too dark. So I'm just going to add a little bit brightness here to overall. And I'm going to add another point here on the shadows and just see if we can get to a really nice looking result just as a final adjustment on the subject here. So I'm just kind of, I like that contrast and that contrasty brightness we're kind of adding to the subject here. So if I just zoom in, you can just see the shadows here. We pretty much had them correct. I wouldn't try refining further on the shadows. It will just introduce more issues, I would say. So yeah, a little bit brighter. I'm just going to invert it again. Image rotation, flip horizontal. I actually like what we did initially, and adding more brightness is probably unnecessary at this point. Highly subjective. So because I can't really decide, and I don't want to waste a lot of time, I'm just going to turn on this curves, and I'm just going to call this final curves. And we made all we did was slightly turned up the highlights and basically put a clip on the shadows. So we could just move the highlights, which creates more of a contrast effect on the subject. So because I can't really decide and I like what we did, I'm just going to adjust the opacity on this layer and see if we can just add a very gentle adjustment. So I reckon 35% is good. Actually, maybe even less, maybe just 20%. Yeah, I'm happy with that. We added 20%. So image rotation, flip horizontal, just to take it back to where we were. And right there, I think that pretty much does it for the compositing overview. So we've done all the base colors and lighting, and now we are going to move on to refining the edges of the subject.